The blue-white explosion above Manhattan was visible from miles away, lighting up the entire skyline like a second sunrise. Peter swung toward it as fast as he could push himself, launching between skyscrapers while fragments of impossible images flickered across the sky above him. For a few disorienting seconds he'd catch glimpses of another version of New York occupying the empty space between two buildings, before it vanished and the familiar skyline snapped back into place. Down below, cars stopped dead in the streets as pedestrians stared upward in confusion and fear. Some people screamed outright when the buildings around them briefly warped into structures that clearly didn't belong to their world. Peter kept moving, chasing the energy signature toward the center of the disturbance, unable to shake the message still burning in his mind. MJ remembers everything. Part of him desperately wanted it to be true. The rest of him was terrified of exactly what that might mean. If MJ had genuinely recovered every memory of him, the emotional connection between them could be strong enough to destabilize the entire spell on its own. He reached the rooftop where the energy was strongest and found her standing near the edge, staring out across Manhattan with tears streaming silently down her face. Peter landed several feet away, and for a few long seconds neither of them said a word. Then MJ turned and looked directly at him. Peter. That single word tore straight through every emotional wall he'd spent months building around himself. He reached up and pulled off his mask. MJ ran to him immediately, and they held each other so tightly Peter nearly lost his footing on the edge of the roof. He closed his eyes and clung to her like she might vanish again the second he let go. She cried into his shoulder, saying his name over and over, and it became clear almost immediately that she remembered everything. Their first meeting, the bridge, the battles they'd fought side by side, the night she discovered who he really was under the mask, the final unbearable moments with Aunt May, and even the choice Peter had made to ask Dr. Strange to erase him from her memory entirely, followed by the terrible silence that had swallowed everything afterward. Peter didn't know what to say to any of it. He'd imagined this exact reunion more times than he could count, but nothing he'd pictured in his head came close to actually holding her again. MJ finally pulled back just far enough to touch his face, telling him quietly that she'd spent months feeling like some essential piece of her own life had been ripped away without any explanation at all. She'd always sensed something missing but could never name what it was. Now finally she understood exactly why. Peter Parker had been erased from her mind completely, but somehow the feelings attached to him had never actually left. Peter started apologizing, the words spilling out before he could stop them, but MJ cut him off. "You saved everyone," she said. Peter shook his head. "I lost you." MJ looked at him steadily. "You didn't lose me." And for the first time since Aunt May's death, Peter let himself believe, just for a moment, that maybe his life wasn't completely beyond saving after all. Then the building shook violently beneath them, and the moment shattered instantly. A massive crack tore open across the sky, spreading like broken glass fracturing across a windshield. Through it, Peter and MJ could see another version of Manhattan entirely, buildings burning, sirens screaming through unfamiliar streets, some enormous figure moving between skyscrapers in the distance. Then the image vanished as fast as it had appeared. MJ turned to Peter, eyes wide. "What was that?" He gave her the honest answer. "Another reality." She stared at him. "How many?" Peter looked back up at the fractured sky. "Too many." The energy kept spreading outward through the city. All across New York people began remembering, not everyone not yet but enough to matter. Ned Leeds stopped dead in the middle of a crowded sidewalk, catching his own reflection in a shop window. A memory surfaced out of nowhere, Peter Parker standing right beside him. Then another, Peter revealing he was Spider-Man. Then another, the three of them laughing together like it was nothing at all. Ned grabbed his head as the memories crashed over him all at once, and finally whispered a name he hadn't spoken out loud in what felt like years. Peter. Across town, Happy Hogan experienced something almost identical, walking down a hospital corridor when the memory of Aunt May hit him out of nowhere, the woman who had meant so much to him, and then Peter, and then the exact night everything in his life had changed forever. Happy stopped walking entirely, tears filling his eyes without warning, unable to understand why he was suddenly remembering a person the entire world had insisted for months had never existed at all. Then another wave of energy rolled through the city, and thousands of people experienced fragmented memories all at once. Some remembered Peter specifically. Others remembered Spider-Man. Others still remembered entirely different versions of events that had never happened here. A woman convinced she had a son who didn't exist, a police officer certain he'd once fought alongside a Spider-Man dressed in black, a scientist who suddenly recalled working with a Peter Parker who had never been bitten by any spider at all. Chaos spread through the streets in every direction. Peter and MJ moved through it together, working the way they always used to, Peter catching a collapsing traffic light before it crushed a crowd of onlookers while MJ helped guide panicked civilians away from a damaged subway entrance. The teamwork came back instantly and naturally, like the months apart had simply never happened at all. But Peter noticed something deeply unsettling as they worked. Every single time MJ recalled another detail from their shared past, another dimensional disturbance flared up somewhere nearby. He finally told her the truth. "You remembering me is making this worse." MJ didn't want to hear it at first, but Peter laid out everything the stranger had discovered. Their memories weren't simply resurfacing on their own. They were actively forging connections between realities, and the stronger the emotional bond behind each memory, the stronger that connection became. MJ understood instantly what that meant. "So I'm hurting everyone just by remembering you?" "No," Peter said quickly, taking her hand. "You're not doing anything wrong. But the world is breaking because of us," she said. Peter didn't have an answer for that. MJ looked up at the fractured sky above them. "Then we fix it." They made their way to the Sanctum Sanctorum, hoping to finally find real answers. The building was still unstable, portals flickering open and shut randomly throughout the rooms. Deep inside, Peter discovered that Dr. Strange had left behind a magical recording before he disappeared. When Peter activated it, Strange's projected image flickered to life in the air in front of them. "If you're seeing this, the spell has been compromised," the recording began. Peter listened closely as Strange explained that the original spell had been designed specifically to separate Peter Parker from this universe's memory of him, but because Peter's very existence was tied to countless other realities, the spell had inadvertently created a kind of magical pressure. Every universe containing a version of Peter Parker had remained quietly, invisibly connected to all the others the entire time. Strange had believed those connections would gradually weaken and fade on their own. They hadn't. Instead, they'd simply been waiting, building pressure the entire time. The memory spell hadn't erased anything permanently, it had become a seal. And now, after months of quiet pressure, that seal was finally breaking apart. Peter asked the recording, almost pleading how to stop it. Strange's projected expression turned grave. "There is only one way," he said, and then the recording ended abruptly, leaving the room in silence. Peter stared at the empty space where the image had been. MJ asked what Strange could have possibly meant by that. Peter didn't have an answer. That's when they heard footsteps behind them. Ned walked into the sanctum and Peter turned around slowly. For several long seconds, the two of them just stared at each other in disbelief. Then Ned broke into a smile. "Hey, Peter." Peter's eyes filled with tears instantly, and they pulled each other into a tight embrace while MJ watched, smiling through tears of her own. For one brief, fragile moment, everything actually felt normal again. Peter had MJ back. He had Ned back. His closest friends remembered him. The life he'd believed was gone for good seemed, impossibly, to be finding its way back to him. The happiness didn't last. A violent explosion rocked the building, and Ned's head snapped toward the window. Something was approaching fast. Peter pulled his mask back on without a second thought, and the three of them watched together as multiple figures began appearing across the fractured city skyline outside. Not all of them were villains. Some looked like other versions of Spider-Man. Some looked like heroes Peter had never encountered. Some were clearly criminals, and some were creatures he couldn't even begin to identify. Reality itself was collapsing faster than anyone had anticipated, and Peter finally understood they'd reached the final stage of whatever this was. Everyone was remembering now. And everything, every version of every reality connected to him, was starting to come back all at once. Across Manhattan, ordinary people began glimpsing alternate versions of their own lives playing out around them. Some ran toward those glimpses. Others ran screaming in the opposite direction. The entire city had become a collision point between countless different worlds, all bleeding into one another at once. Peter, MJ, and Ned stood together inside the trembling sanctum as the sky above them fractured into what looked like 1,000 separate pieces of broken glass. And there, finally, Peter understood the terrible truth of what he'd actually done. He had spent months quietly wishing that everyone would remember him again. Now that wish had come true in full. And it was tearing the entire world apart. Peter looked at MJ. "We have to undo this." She understood immediately what that would mean. If they restored the spell, she would forget him all over again. So would Ned. So would Happy. So would everyone. Peter would go right back to being the forgotten Spider-Man, alone in that tiny apartment with a box of old photographs under his bed. MJ studied his face carefully. "Is that what you want?" Peter shook his head. "No. Then what do you want? He looked around the room slowly, at Ned, at MJ, at the life he had wanted back so badly it had nearly broken him. I want everyone to be safe, he said quietly. MJ understood exactly what that meant too. Peter was already bracing himself to sacrifice everything all over again, alone, the same way he had the first time. This time she wasn't going to let him. She took his hand firmly in hers. Then we'll find another way. Peter looked at her. You remember what happened last time? MJ nodded without hesitation. And I'm not letting you do it alone this time. Outside, another reality collided directly with Manhattan, and the entire building shuddered violently around them. Peter pulled his mask down over his face. MJ caught his arm. Peter. He stopped and turned back to her. She managed a small, steady smile despite everything. No matter what happens, I'll find you. Peter smiled beneath the mask where she couldn't see it, and the three of them stepped together toward the collapsing city outside. Neither Peter nor MJ noticed they were being watched from somewhere across the fractured skyline. A figure stood motionless inside one of the dimensional openings, watching them both. A figure that looked almost exactly like Peter, except older, visibly more damaged, dressed in a black Spider-Man suit unlike anything Peter had ever worn. The figure watched the reunion play out in silence. Then quietly to no one at all he said, "You still haven't learned." The portal closed a moment later. Peter never saw him standing there. But the alternate Spider-Man had seen everything. And he already knew exactly what was coming next.